Hi, Shalom. I hope you are all well. I'm sorry I'm not with you in person. I'm speaking to you from the Upper West Side of Manhattan. It's a little bit in the evening, Tuesday evening, and I'm looking forward to recording this shiur, sharing some insights with you on Parshat Bo. Now, Parshat Bo, as we know, describes the final three plagues and the beginnings of Yetziat Mitzrayim. And that's where we join the psukim, which are going to be the springboard for our Midrash, for the Midrash that we're going to focus on and the discussion we're going to have. So let's begin by looking through these psukim from Shemot Perek Yud Bet, psukim Lamed Zayin to Mem Bet. Yis'u b'nei Yisrael meRamses Sukkot. This happens straight after Makat Bechorot, that Am Yisrael leave and they go from Ramses to Sukkot, K'sheshmot elef regli gvarim Ivad Metaf. And so we're told 600,000 men of a particular age, aside from the younger men, the younger children, the women. Altogether, we often say there was about 3 million Jews there at the time, leaving Mitzrayim and then going to Har Sinai. וגם ערב רב עלה איתם, וצאן ובקר מתנה כבד מאוד. Here it's referring to Erev Rav. We mentioned them last week's in last week's shiur, when talking about who was Moshe aggrieved by that they weren't listening to him. So we mentioned them in that shiur. It's referring and telling us the story of the matzot, how the Bnei Israel were in a rush, they tarried. And they'd been in Mitzrayim for 430 years. There's a matter of debate as to how to do the calculation of 430 years. This continues in the next pasuk mem aleph. V'imiket 30 shana ו400 shana v'hi be'etzem hayom hazeh yatz'u kol tzivot Hashem me'eret Mitzrayim. And then we're told in pasuk mem bet, Leil shimurim hu l'Hashem l'otziam me'eret Mitzrayim. Hu halayla hazeh l'Hashem shimurim l'chu b'nei Yisrael l'dorotam. Leil shimurim, of course, is a phrase we use on Seder night, but this is describing this very, very powerful, precious and transformative moment this evening of exodusing from Egypt. Now, we know this story. We know the story of the matzos. We know the story of the people. We know the story of the Erev Rav. Or we know the story of all the things that we've seen in these psukim. What I want us to do is focus on that first pasuk and focus on V'yis'u b'nei Yisrael meRamses Sukkot. Why so? Because that is what our Midrash is going to focus on. Says the Midrash Tanchuma, V'yis'u b'nei Yisrael meRamses, the children of Israel journeyed from Ramses Sukkot. Ramses Sukkot, 40 parasa. From Ramses to Sukkot is 40 parasa. A parasa is generally about 3 miles, so it's about 120 miles. That's why Rashi, if you look at Rashi on the pasuk there, says it's 120 mil. But the point that the Midrash wishes to bring is, when Bnei Israel began journeying, and Moshe was already in Sukkot, and the end of the 3 million people are still in Ramses, when Moshe spoke in Sukkot, they could still hear him Ramses. Just think about that. 3 million people marching, and says a Midrash, Moshe is at the beginning, and he's speaking, and the people right at the back, 120 miles back, 40 parasah behind, still hear Moshe's voice. Moshe's voice is heard from Sukkot to Ramses. Says the Midrash, and don't be surprised as if somehow that is a kind of usual thing that happens. Because in fact, the dust that he threw that led to the makkah of shchin, of boils, it spread for 40 days. And the dust was on all of the land of Egypt. And because Moshe threw the dust, and that dust reached all of Egypt, and it takes 40 days in order to travel Egypt, then says the Midrash, well, don't be surprised that Moshe's voice traveled. Now, this is itself a very cryptic Midrash. It's telling me about one city and another city, one location and another. And Moshe is already reached one destination, he's speaking, they can hear him in the other. And they say, don't be so surprised. When he threw dust, the dust was able to travel for 40 days. Firstly, wow. And secondly, wow. And thirdly, what's a connection between dust and voice? So before we go into our explanation of this Midrash by Rav Chaim Manis Pardes, you may have ever heard the phrase Avak Lashon Hara, the dust of Lashon Hara. It's a phrase that is used in ethical and legal discussions about Lashon Hara. It's a phrase that I've quoted, but I never fully understood it. And when reading this Midrash, I realize a connection is being made between the way dust spreads and the way a voice can reach. And it says here the dust spread as far as his voice would reach. And I think that phrase, Avak Lashon Hara, which isn't our focus of this year, but it's a phrase, of course, that we reference, the dust of Lashon Hara. It probably draws itself from here, that just as the dust of Moshe spread went for 40 days, so too his voice spread all that distance. So too when we speak Lashon Hara, Avak Lashon Hara, it's like dust. It goes all over the place. So I'm just mentioning that because when I read this Midrash, I said, oh, that's the pshat of Avak Lashon Hara. But still, what's this idea of Moshe Rabbeinu's voice being heard so far away? To answer it, we're going to see an essay by Rav Chaim Manis Pardes, who was the Av Beis Din of Tel Aviv, and he was an expert in the Maharal. You'll understand why I mention that now. He wrote a whole bunch of Sfarim, one of which is a sefer called Ashdot Piska. I found it on Eitz Chochma, and he has, and it's, in fact, this is a piece from Parshat Kitavo. I'll explain why in a minute too. Nevertheless, in this piece, he says so many interesting things of which I had a sense of some of them, but I'd never seen it all together. And I think it's just majestic. I think it brings together so much of totality of Chumash, of Tanakh, and it helps us understand the concept. So before we jump into the Ashdot Piska, let's make it clear, and this is an idea I presume you're already familiar with, that whether or not certain numbers should be taken literally in a Tanakh, they are often also to be taken symbolically. We use certain numbers 7 or 70 or 120. It's not to say those numbers aren't true. It's not to say that a span of 120 days didn't happen, it did. Or a span of 7 days didn't happen, it did. But it is to say there are deliberate numerical patterns in the Tanakh. And I'd argue the deliberate numerical patterns in Tanakh and Chazal. And those patterns are there to teach us a message. They are not just literal or historical, but they're also symbolic. They're there to teach us a message. Having explained it, let's look back at our Midrash, and it says, it says it's Arba Imparsa. By the way, Rashi has mentioned, says it's 120 mil. But the Midrash chooses to calculate the distance with parsa. Why? Because the number 40. And then we already see in the Midrash here, it says, and what, don't be surprised about 40, because the dust that Moshe spread was also 40. Well, one is 40 in terms of time, in terms of distance, one is 40 in terms of days. What's the connection? Didn't say necessarily that Moshe's voice spread for 40 days. It said it spread for 40 parsa. The dust spread for 40 days. But according to Ashdod Pisgah, there's a message in 40. And he's going to walk us through every example. And I know you know some of them, but bring them together is going to probably blow your mind. And I think it'll help you understand many other Torah teachings and rabbinic teachings. So let's begin. And he begins, as mentioned, this is an essay from Parshat Kitavo. And in Parshat Kitavo, we're told, Lo natan Hashem lachem lev ladat ve'inayim li'od v'oznayim lishmoa ad hayom hazeh. Towards the end of Sefer Dvarim, what? Moshe Rabbeinu telling the Jewish people, only now do you really understand the Torah. They received the Torah 40 years beforehand. Why only now are you able to understand it, or you're being given the ability to understand the Torah? For Rashi explains, quoting Masechet Avodah Zarah, לא נתן השם לכם לב לדעת שאין אדם עומד ויורד על סוף דעתו ועומד כוונתו וחוכמתו משנתו של רבו עד שהוא מגיע לגיל 40 שנה. But the teacher, until you reach the age of 40, you don't fully fathom the teachings of your teacher. Or expressed differently, until 40 years have passed since you've started hearing your teacher, you haven't been able to fully process the teachings of your teacher. In fact, Rav Hershel Schachter writes, I think it's in Divrei Rav or Nefesh Rav, he begins by quoting this Gemara of Avodah Zarah, and he says, only now, decades later, do I understand what Rav Soloveitch was talking about. So, what is Moshe Rabbeinu saying to the Jewish people? He says, 40 years ago, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us a Torah. 40 years ago, I started teaching the Torah. But now, 40 years later, only now is a penny dropping about what is the totality of Torah. What are the meanings of these psukim? What is the depth of these laws? So the Gemara of Avodah Zarah is quoted that this is the way of teachers. There are teachers who years ago I thought, what are they talking about? Now I say, oh, now I get what they were talking about. So what is Arba'im Shana? What is 40 years? Says Rav Pardes. עד כאן דברי רש"י. לפי זה כוונת הכתוב כאן אמר לישראל, כי עד היום הזה שבו תמו 40 שנות הנידודים במדבר, לא ידעו לישראל סוף דעתו של משה רבנו. Until 40 years had happened of Am Yisrael wandering in the wilderness, they never fully fathomed what Moshe Rabbeinu was telling them. אם כן, איפה יש במניין ה-40 משום דרגת השגה והבנה של חדירה אל עומקם וסופם של הדברים. This tells us that the number 40 suggests a sense of comprehension, a sense of getting to the grip and the depth of what has been taught and what has been said. And this is what's been taught in Masechet Avot, in Pirkei Avot, chapter 5, Mishnah 22, Ben Arba'im Labina. When you're 40, then you get Bina. When you're 40, do you achieve this depth of understanding called Bina? Until that point in time, you can hear things, you can think you understand. But it's only when you reach that age that are you able to really understand the depth of what's been taught to you, the depth of that life experience. I mentioned that Rav Pardes was an expert in the Maharal, so he's going to quote the Maharal now. A Pirush Maharal Sham, the Maharal says in his Pirush on Pirkei Avos, כי הבינה מופיע מתגלה באדם כאשר הוא השכל בשלמות. לכן הבאים הוא גיל הבינה והדעת בשלמות, השכל ומחשבה. Says Maharal, Bina appears and expresses itself in a person when a person is intellectually developed, intellectually refined. And so he says, why is 40 years of Bina and Da'at? So when you're intellectually clear, it's when you achieve also the depth of emotional intelligence. Continues now, Rav Pardes. Let's have a look at how Chazal treat the number 40. And what they mean by bina in all these other situations. In Mishnah Midot, we are taught Mishnah Midot describes the dimensions of the Beis Hamikdash. Aber im amar gova shel pitcho shel ulam, heichal shel Beis Hamikdash. The heichal of the temple was 40 amah high. Why is it 40 amah high? Continues of Pardes, v'harei yisodo shel mikdash chol tochno mahuto hi abina ba'elyona. He baa gam kan lidei bitu min 40 amot petach haolam. Isn't just a place for sacrifices, it's a place for comprehension, of understanding your relation with the divine. That's what the 40 is all about. That's what it symbolizes. The 40 years of Am Yisrael listening to Moshe, learning from Moshe, following Moshe. Then the penny drops in the 40th year. Ben Abim Nabina, age 40, then the penny drops. And here, the Beis Hamikdash, the height of the Heichal is 40. There the penny drops. There's when a person says, now I understand the glory of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. The Sfarim say, the Rambam says, there were 40 generations from Moshe till, now he says, Rabbeinu Kodesh Yehuda Nasi. I think the Rambam actually mentions Rav Ashi, but Rabbi Pardes is going to refer to Rav Yehuda Nasi, approximately so. 40 generations from Moshe till then. Why does the Rambam want to tell us this? In fact, you can find a list of in the Rambam from who, and he goes from person to person. Afkana Koana Lama, the whole point of Rambam mentioning this here is Kinitina Tadoa Shabal Pem and Vashmi Sinai Shal Nechret Brit Ben HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael Lo Bala De Bitoy B'Chtav Mishum Eit Lasol Hashem Hafirot Ha'ezecha Adir HaKadosh Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi Ad La'ach Shavro Avim Shanot Moshe Rabbeinu. There was a shift in the comprehension of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, going from oral to written, which is Eis Lasol Hashem Hafirot Ha'ezecha. We did this for the sake of the preservation of the Jewish people, but nevertheless, that shift occurs when the Mishnah is written down, and that level of understanding the Mishnah then deepens now into written word. 40 again, 40 generations leading to the culmination of a deeper level of, or different level of comprehension of the Torah Sheba'al Peh. And during the process of those 40 generations, the depth of understanding of the Torah was plugged into, invested in those sages. That's why then they were so worried that the Torah would be forgotten. And that's why Rabbi Yehuda Nasi writes down the Mishnah, and he saves them from forgetting Torah Sheba'al Peh. שם עבדך אני הבינני ועדך תורתך. אלא עשה להשם הפרות עשיך. Meaning the pasuk there in Tehillim talks about how the bina was achieved both in its understanding of Torah Sheba'al Peh and the understanding of the need to write it down at that point in time. הייתה בינה עמוקה של אחר במדורס שאובר ממשה זכר רבי הקודש להבין להשכיל לכתוב את התורה שבעל פה מכוח עזר של השם. He's also saying here that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi required those 40 years of understanding to be able to distill the Torah Sheba'al Peh into the Mishnah. So what have we seen? We've seen the 40 years of Moshe's leadership of Am Yisrael, and only in the 40th year now you'll understand. We've seen in Pirkei Avot Bedu Abim Labina. Now we've seen 40 generations from Moshe to Rabbi Nasi. But Rav Pinchas is not done yet. So it's Rav Pardes is not done yet. By no means. Kach nirali lasbir He says, let me now tell you about a number of other Mamrei Chazal. He says many times in the Gemara, a Rebbe, a teacher, will say, I review this idea 40 times. They learned it so many times, so they wouldn't forget it. But why 40? Why, as we see in Gemara Ksubas, page 58, it was taught 40 times. Why was it taught 40 times? Because 40 times means they really, really got to grips with it. They really, really understood it. They did that. You review something so many times, you achieve a different level of comprehension. Mishum Kacha Amru continues Rav Pardes, and this is why we talk about Amukah Shlo B'derech Mikra Mechil to the Parshat B'Shalach. What is the Mechil to say on Parshat B'Shalach? This is useful. This is for next week's Parsha. After Moses dies, they eat the man for another 40 days. The man came b'zchut Moshe, and they continued to eat the man for 40 days. Why? Because of this idea of really understanding this gift of the man that Moshe had given them. Masechet Yuma, Amru lechem avrim kol ish lechem shemolachei hasharetz oichli Moshe. This lechem, this man, is lechem for people, even though it's technically divine bread. This wasn't just some kind of material food. Instead, this man led to deeper understanding of the Eibishter of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We got Mamriot Adma Atam Shem Lachei Hasharet. V'kivan shezu haitam auto shel man, lachen zachar yisod b'achilatam la'ach mois Moshe b'mechlish 40 yom. That's why they were able to continue to eat the man for another 40 days, because Moshe was the enabler of this zchut, and it still took time for them to appreciate what it was all about. So all of these are examples of arba'im, of 40. Rav Pardes isn't done yet. There's another page. There you go. I don't know. Did you see that one coming? Mishum kach, and now you're going to love some of these examples. According to this theme, says Rav Pardes, now you're going to appreciate Lama Amru Masechet Sotah, why it said in Masechet Sotah, Abba Imshom Kodim Yitziat Havlad, Bat Kol Yotzet Vamer, Bat Ploni the Ploni. There's a Gemara, Masechet Sotah, 40 days before the formation of a Vlad, a Bat Kol basically declares this one for this one as a divine proclamation about the Shidduch. Zivugim are not just by chance. Instead, they are spiritual, they are divine. Zivugim are made by Kadosh Baruch Hu. So the Zohar tells us that Kadosh Baruch Hu is the Mezavik Zivugim. And continues the Maharal. I mentioned that Rav Pardes was an expert in the Maharal. כבר העריך המהר"ל בפירושיו למסכת סוטה שם ועוד מקומות בנושא זה של קדושת זיווגו של האדם, כמו שכתבתי בספרי פרקים משנתו של המהר"ל מפראג. It says the Maharal discusses this theme at great length, והדבר זה בא לידי ביטוי במניין 40 הימים שלפני עצירת הוולד. But ultimately this notion stems from the 40, because the 40 represents wisdom, and right? It's not just the planning took 40 days. It's the depth of understanding that this one is for this one. That's what the 40 days is about. Right? What is Moshe? How long is Moshe on Har Sinai? At least on each individual visit, 40 days and nights. Then he came down for 40 days. Rosh Chodesh Elul, he goes back up Har Sinai. And then he comes down to Yom Kippur. Moshe is up Har Sinai for these periods of time because he needs to achieve that depth of understanding of what is Torah. 40 and 40 and 40. Remember that 40 was 120 mil. שאמרו מסכת נדרים, וכדי להדגיש את הבינה המיוחדת שזכה לה למשה בהר סיני, in order to emphasize the unique level of Bina that Moshe achieves at Har Sinai, that's why he is there. Meaning, it's not he was there for 40 days, therefore he understood. He needed to achieve that level of understanding. That's why he had to be there for 40 days. Yom Kippur was the 40th day. What's idea 40 from the beginning of Elul to Rosh Hashanah? After 40 days of reflection, we mirror Moshe because we have Elul up till Yom Kippur, where we think about whether we've been good, about Shuvah, etc. Yom Kippur is about a day of slicha and petition, etc. Because of that time we spent thinking about all these things. Here, this one you're going to love. I don't know if you've heard this idea before. Last week's parasha. What is the staff? It's 40 sah. The mateh weighs 40. Why? Did it really weigh 40? Seemingly so, but that's not the message. It's the mateh enabled bina that the mitzvah now understand who is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The 40 appears because the idea of bina, the idea of depth, the idea of comprehension, the idea of understanding. What is the weight to the luchas of bris? Same thing, 40 sah. I mean, this is brilliant. This is just so amazing. We have probably heard some of these ideas. Here, Pardes brings them all together. He explains it. And then he goes on to tell us. What's the minimum amount of water in a mikveh? 40. This level of emotionally transformative change that occurs in the water. Remember, Bina isn't just intellectual understanding, it's a different level, emotional and spiritual understanding. And now it quotes our Midrash. Now Rav Pardes quotes our Midrash from Midrash Tanchum Parshat Bo. Abim Parsa Ayakol Moshe Nishmanu Rachok Sukkot Ramses. Moshe's voice is heard 40 parsa from Ramses to Sukkot, or from Sukkot to Ramses. He goes on, he quotes other examples. Moshe was in the house of Pharaoh 40 years. He was there for 40 years, and therefore he learned the very nuances, the cultural references of the Mitzrim. According to one opinion in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, the period of Yimot HaMashiach is 40 Shana. 40 Shana Melech David Yad Yisrael. Melech David Yisrael. David is the king for 40 years. 40 Shana Melech David Shlomo Chacham. So to Shlomo, 40 Shana Kodem Tichat Haguf Mamtenet Lo Anashama Be'eretz Yisrael. According to the Zohar, 40 years before Tchias HaMeitim, the Neshamas, whose bodies will be restored or are waiting to be animated in Eretz Yisrael, B'shana Arba'im, Yakumu Gufot Me'afa. Gam B'inyanenu Lo Natan Hashem Lechem Levad La'abim Shana. So hopefully we've understood these examples. There are many. But now what I'd like us to do is go back to our Midrash. So we've learned a whole bunch of beautiful things. What are we to do now with this Midrash? So I'm just moving it so we can see it. What's the message? Is it that Moshe had a big voice? He could scream? Truth be told, Erev Shabbos, when I want the kids to get in the shower, you can hear it almost Parshat as well from my house. The message isn't that Moshe's got a loud voice. The message isn't even that they heard him. The message is that already at this point, the people are changing. Because the number 40 is appearing. And the number 40 represents Bina. They were a slave nation, and now they can hear him from 40 parsa away. Which means they can start to understand Moshe. We heard last week's parasha, they couldn't listen to him. Maybe not all, but some of them. Now, not only can they hear him, they can hear him from afar. What is hearing him from afar about? What it actually means is they have shifted. They've shifted their perspective. Am Yisrael are now ready to hear Moshe. Previously, his voice couldn't be heard. Now it's heard from afar. It's heard from afar because the people have now realized that he is a leader. He's going to be the Gael, the Redeemer, obviously, channeling the power that Kadosh Baruch Hu has given him. So 40 represents not Moshe's understanding, the people's understanding of who is Moshe. And it stretches to those 3 million, both those already in Sukkot and going back to the people in Ramses. And I think when you proceed with this Midrash Tanchuma, what's the comparison between the dust of Shechin, the voice of Moshe? Well, dust of Shechin was a magifa, was a makah. That's negative. Oftentimes people can hear sharp voices, harsh tones, threats, punishment, but they're not always so great listening to the good. But the people are now ready to hear. The people are now ready to heed what Moshe has to say. And so the Midrash Tanchuma is telling us 40 was used for punishment, and now 40 is being used for good. 40 was used against the Mitzrim. Now 40 is being used for Am Yisrael. So here's this tiny, tiny detail mentioned by Midrash. Not necessarily obvious in terms of what it means. Coming from a pasuk that we just simply think is about geography. The Chazal say it's not to do with geography. Yeah, you should know where Am Yisrael journeyed. But this is telling us more about the physical journey of Am Yisrael. It's telling you about their intellectual, emotional, spiritual journey. From previously being unable to hear Moshe, they can now hear Moshe. And it's all captured in the 40. And as Rav Pardes then explains the meaning of the 40, you see it everywhere. You see there are times when we get it, times when we don't, and times we're being prompted to think about this notion. What is 40? Is it always a physical thing? Perhaps, but it's also an emotional, intellectual thing. And that's where all those examples come from, about listening to a teacher. About the matter of the staff, don't forget that. Of the Arbim Yom Ba'arbim Lai Lechem La'achatim Lai Moshatiti. All of these examples. So I hope this has been of help, of interest, a relatively simple idea of what is 40, but it changes how we look at what's happening to Am Yisrael as they leave Egypt before having fully left. I mean, they've left, but they are still yet to reach Yam Suf. And the message is in the 40. So I wish you well. I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. And thank you so much and take care.